Hey everyone, before we start, don't forget to subscribe. This story is full of betrayal, calculated revenge, and a truth that hits harder than anyone could expect. The winter in Vienna was bitter that year, with snow settling thick on the cobblestone streets and the Danube's surface a mirror of gray ice. I arrived at the small, quiet hotel on the outskirts of the city just after dusk. The streetlights glimmered faintly through the haze, casting long shadows across the sidewalks. The chill didn't bother me. Anger, when transformed into purpose, burns hotter than any cold. She had made her choice months earlier. Clara, my wife of 8 years, had decided that fidelity was optional. A business trip to Salzburg had turned into an affair she thought she could hide. I had discovered the messages weeks after she returned, flirtations escalating to plans that made my blood run cold. But I didn't confront her immediately. That was the beauty of patience. Instead, I watched, documented, and prepared. I rented the room she had booked in Salzburg under the guise of a business retreat. I knew her schedule, her habits, the friends she thought she could trust to keep secrets. Every detail mattered. The time she checked in, the elevators she favored, the way she carried herself as though she were invincible. The day arrived. I followed from a discreet distance as she entered the hotel with him, laughing, unaware that the walls themselves could betray her. I never intended to hurt physically. Revenge is more potent when it is psychological, when the mind comprehends betrayal and consequence at the same time. Inside the hotel room, I waited outside, monitoring every movement through security feeds I had obtained discreetly. I knew her patterns, where she would place her bag, the small ritual of removing her coat, the way she poured wine to steady nerves. And then, just as planned, the storm outside intensified, snow slamming against the windows, isolating the building in a quiet, frozen shell. I called a local contact, a skilled professional who owed me a favor from years ago, ensuring that the electrical systems in the suite were tampered with just enough to create a controlled failure. Not lethal, not permanent, but immobilizing in effect. Clara and her lover would awaken not in comfort, but in paralysis. Their phones out of reach, emergency exits temporarily disabled, the reality pressing down with the weight of consequence. Hours passed. I observed from a neighboring building, sipping bitter coffee as the snow fell. The stress was visible even from a distance. Clara screamed at first, confusion turning to panic as the situation sank in. He shouted, disbelief and fear tangled in his voice, and I remained silent. No intrusion, no interference, only the orchestrated revelation of consequence. By the next morning, hotel staff found the couple, paralyzed by a combination of induced injury and psychological shock. Emergency responders arrived, attending to them with professional detachment, but the damage had already been done, not to their bodies, but to the illusions that they had relied on. I arrived at the hospital soon after, not to gloat, but to observe. Clara recognized me immediately. Her eyes widened, the color draining from her face as comprehension dawned. For 3 years, she had manipulated, lied, and schemed, believing that I would remain passive. The consequences were something she could avoid. And now, faced with the stark reality, she understood fully. "Marco, she began, her voice trembling, half anger, half fear. I stood silently, letting the room absorb the truth. The betrayal she had committed was now mirrored back, not in accusation or violence, but in inevitability. The paralysis had frozen more than her body. It had frozen the narrative she had believed she controlled, leaving her completely exposed. The doctors explained the cause. A rare, precise reaction to the tampered electrical wiring combined with stress-induced neuromuscular response. Natural causes or human intervention, they could not definitively say. But Clara knew. She had always known that I was capable of quiet, calculated actions. The realization etched horror into her features. Weeks followed in the sterile, white corridors of the hospital. Clara faced not just physical therapy, but social consequences. Friends and colleagues began to question her accounts of the incident, noticing inconsistencies in her retelling. The affair she had conducted in secret now became public knowledge, corroborated by evidence I had left in careful hands. I visited occasionally, never in anger always measured. Each meeting was a silent lesson in consequence. Her eyes, once sharp with superiority, now flickered with fear and remorse. She attempted to justify, to rationalize, to manipulate, but I had long since learned that truth, when combined with patience and timing, is unstoppable. Outside the hospital, the city of Vienna moved in quiet oblivion. Trams rattled over the rails, tourists scuttled along the Ringstrasse, and cafes steamed with the aroma of coffee and baked goods. Life continued, indifferent to individual suffering, yet within these walls, justice had quietly unfolded. Months later, Clara had regained partial mobility, but the psychological imprint remained. The betrayal she had committed, the hubris that had led her to believe she was untouchable, had been met with a precise, patient, and inescapable consequence. I returned to my apartment overlooking the Danube, snow melting on the banks, light reflecting off the water like fractured glass. The anger that had driven me, the planning and patience, had culminated not in cruelty, but in undeniable truth. Clara's choices had consequences. Actions have weight. Betrayal, when left unchecked, meets inevitable reckoning. I met with a lawyer to finalize the separation quietly, ensuring that Clara could not manipulate the outcome through charm or deceit. Assets were divided, her social standing diminished by the exposure of her affair, and the careful orchestration of evidence ensured that she had no means of regaining influence over the life she had abandoned. As spring approached, the city thawed, the Danube flowing steady and relentless, much like the passage of truth through time. I walked along the riverbanks, the air fresh and sharp, considering the lessons learned. Revenge had not been loud, it had not been brutal, it had been inevitable, orchestrated with precision and patience, and delivered with the quiet certainty of justice. Clara's final realization was profound. Betrayal, no matter how cleverly executed, carries weight. And those who underestimate the patient, the observant, and the determined will eventually face consequences that cannot be escaped. I looked out at the horizon, the sun reflecting off the water in molten gold, and understood fully that justice is not always immediate, but when carefully prepared, it is absolute. The paralysis had been temporary, but the lesson was permanent. From that day forward, I moved freely, unburdened by deception, strengthened by patience, and vindicated not by vengeance, but by the inevitability of truth. The city, indifferent yet alive, bore witness to the quiet resolution of betrayal, and I finally felt the weight of injustice lift from my shoulders, leaving only clarity, calm, and the serene satisfaction of inevitability fulfilled.